Say the word therapy at a certain kind of dinner table and watch what happens.
It's a completely presumptuous field.
Yeah.
The fact that you are supposed to come to me, who you've never met, and talk to me about your deepest, darkest secrets, and on top of that, it's supposed to work? Like, that's ridiculous.
I ended up leaving journalism because the trauma was too much for me in the end. And no one really ever asks if the people who are gathering the stories or for you bearing witness to the stories are okay also.
We're all Coke bottles. Life will come and it'll shake your bottle. That pressure will build.
Does the body actually hold trauma in it?
The body keeps the score. The actual title is a metaphor. The pain is there, whether I'm sitting at home on the couch on my ass or if I'm out here helping the community. And so he's like, that's why I'm here.
Welcome back to Story Chaser, the podcast that uncovers the powerful human stories that too often go untold. I'm your host, Tara Ruff. I noticed a trend in my guests this season. A surgeon who was quietly breaking and got handed a wellness seminar. A man who nearly lost everything to addiction and now spends his life pulling others out. And a young man so lonely, it had begun to curdle into something darker. Different lives and different kinds of pain, but every one of them ran into the same question. Why the one thing that might save us is so often the thing we're most ashamed to admit we need. Today, I want to sit inside that question. What is therapy actually for? Because say the word therapy at a certain kind of dinner table and watch what happens. I don't believe in therapy. That's just paying somebody to be your friend. I've heard it from the people I love, people who need it more than they'll ever admit out loud. I've heard it from women, and I've heard it most of all from men who were taught somewhere along the way that needing help is weakness, failure. And a lot of us come by that shame honestly. Our parents didn't believe in therapy. The world they grew up in hadn't accepted it yet, so they white-knuckled their pain, called it strength, and handed that shame down to us. But notice what many of these people have in common. They're often carrying something in private, invisible, something the world let them hold alone. We're quick to argue about whether that kind of pain even earns the help. But there's another kind of pain, the kind that doesn't arrive quietly behind one closed door, but comes for a whole town at once. The flood, the fire, the shooting that empties a main street. And when the pain comes that way, out loud, on the news, something different happens. Suddenly, nobody argues about whether people need help. We send it. We call it heroic. And I've stood on that side of it too. I spent the majority of my career in network news, and my job was to find the people whose lives had just been torn in half and get them to say it out loud, on camera. I found the voices, earned their trust, and then handed their worst days to an audience and called it journalism. I still think about whether that was. But the question that has never let go of me is the same. What happens to those people after, and whether anyone actually helps them carry it? My guest today has stood at both ends of this, the private wound and the public one. Kamran Sakhitab is a licensed therapist with a second master's in public health and a certification in disaster resilience leadership. He's done inpatient work inside a frontline New Orleans hospital, sitting with people in the middle of the worst mental health crisis of their life. He's counseled people and led disaster response teams into communities in the days after the catastrophe, and it's work his field has taken notice of. He was named the Disaster Recovery Institute's 2025 Newcomer of the Year and honored nationally for the way he shows up for the communities most people overlook. He's also a former college rugby player and a current mixed martial arts fighter who teaches yoga and builds his whole practice around the body, the breath, the nervous system, the trauma talking alone can't reach. A man who will get in the cage and then teach you how to breathe. So that's what we're going to discuss today. What therapy is actually for, underneath the eye rolls, the wellness app, the words so many of us can't say without flinching. Why we'll run towards a whole town's pain and turn away from the person falling apart beside us. And what it really takes to help someone carry a weight they never asked for and were never taught how to set down. Because trauma doesn't ask for your permission and no one was ever meant to work through it alone. Before we jump in, a disclaimer. This is an educational conversation, not therapy or medical advice, and not a substitute for care. Kamran speaks for himself and no real clients are discussed. If you're struggling, please reach out to a professional of your own. So Kamran, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Tara, thank you so much for having me and such a lovely introduction.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. So Kamran, I want to start where this whole episode starts. People who think therapy is just paying somebody to listen to you. When you hear that, what do you say back?
It's a good question. It certainly can be. That can be therapeutic. Like if you are someone that, doesn't have anyone to listen to them, that's not necessarily incorrect. I do think it's kind of be dumbing it down a little bit. It's like if you see like a really nice sketch or a drawing, you could just say, "Oh, that's scribbles on a paper." I think it probably tells half the story. But even in that specific example, like if that certainly could be therapeutic.
Yeah. And in non-clinical terms then, so give it to us in layman terms, I always like to say, what is therapy actually for?
I have a couple of different analogies that I can kind of use to actionabilize it. It's a mix of a science and an art. At least I'm coining from what my mentor would say, and I wholeheartedly agree. But so I'll speak from what I work on with my clients. So in general, we work to establish goals for clients, right? Because therapy is such a subjective experience, it's pretty hard to figure out what it is. It has to be taken in the context of the client, right? What you're coming in for. An example, I work a lot with men, and the example that I give is, classic boys are like, the boys and men are often like, what's the point of coming to therapy? Like, feeling my emotions? Like, what's the point of that? I can't do anything about it. I said, yeah, okay, I hear you. I'm like, what do you think about being strong? And they're like, I like being strong. So I say, okay, well, let's talk about emotional differentiation. So that's getting very specific with our emotions. So can we do a little activity real quick?
Yeah,
Tara?
let's do it, please.
So I want you to imagine a 6-year-old boy comes to you and says, Tara, I feel bad. What are you going to do?
Ask him why.
Right. Because what the hell does I feel bad mean?
Right.
So you're going to work with that kid to differentiate the general sense into, are you hurt? Do you need to pee? Are you hungry? Right.
Right.
And then you would address that, and you would help him figure out general sense in the context that you're in. If you're at a playground, or if he's overwhelmed, if he just came back from a soccer game, right? And this is getting into some of the body-based work, but what we use to generalize that sense that I feel bad into I'm hungry, I need to pee, I'm hurt, is interoceptive or internal senses. That's where the mind-body practices and connection come in. And then you would address it in a different way. Like if he's hungry, you give him food, or if he needs to use the bathroom, you take him to the restroom. So I often ask my clients, when's the last time you knew you felt good or bad about something, but you didn't really know quite how you felt? And they're like, yeah, usually is the answer or something.
Yeah.
That's it.
No, it's funny. I was just talking to a colleague today. He was feeling sad, and he said, I can't think of why, but I just feel this way and I don't know what to do about it. And in my head, I'm a big believer in therapy. So for me, I say, are you talking to anyone about it? I think that's where people get very misconstrued with that, you're paying for a friend mentality. It's so much deeper than that, because again, you're trained to understand how to navigate the conversation based off of what the client is kind of approaching you with. And again, I'm a big believer. I think therapy works. To those who have tried therapy and it has not worked, it's failed, if that's like a scenario you've ever seen, why do you think that does happen?
There's a couple things it's a really good question, but there's a couple things I want to touch on before I answer it.
Please.
Number one is failure in therapy is very hard to assess because it's inherently subjective. It's entirely self-report. So the only way that there's a failure in therapy is, okay, we've established your specific goals. And I don't necessarily think that's even the best framing. Like, to give you an example, client comes in, has PTSD, is a military vet. And then he goes, we do a lot of work around trauma processing. Maybe he sees someone that does EMDR. He develops really good skills for when he feels triggered, it's like a replay of he's back in combat when he's triggered, right? When he's reliving the event. And we're giving them tools to kind of, okay, before that happens and during that happens, how can I kind of come back down to switch from fight or flight, sympathetic nervous system, a relaxed state. But let's say he's developed that skill or those skills, and he goes back into combat for a second tour, and then all the work is gone, right? Would you consider that failure?
No.
Right. But to kind of I'll go back to your question, I think there's a couple of really important factors in therapy. And this is what I tell my clients. It's a completely presumptuous field.
Yeah.
When you think about it. The fact that you are supposed to come to me, who you've never met, and talk to me about your deepest, darkest secrets.
Right.
And it's supposed to, and on top of that, it's supposed to work. Like that's ridiculous.
Right.
And I wouldn't be here if it didn't. The foundation of that is the therapeutic relationship. This is, it's above whatever like new hot, if it's cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectic behavioral therapy or EMDR, all these different acronyms.
Right.
Foundation is the therapeutic relationship, meaning, Tara, you like the person.
Right. Right. And it's so funny you say that because I've had so many friends who'll try therapy out once and they don't necessarily get along with the therapist. It's not their brand of persons. They say it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It takes time, like any relationship in your life, to find someone who understands you.
I love to actionabilize things, especially in this field, because they keep a lot of theory and then how much of that actually applies in real life. If there's anyone in like listening to this podcast and thinking about trying out therapy and trying to figure out what the hell, like, how do I navigate this field? What is it supposed to work? Not supposed to work? There are two metrics that I would suggest to reflect on. Number one, the therapeutic relationship, meaning, do I like the person that I'm seeing?
Yes.
Usually, I tell my clients take a month, 2 months, couple months. That's the first metric. Second metric is, am I getting continuous like light bulb moments, aha moments? It's supposed to be, another analogy is like a steroid to your own introspection. Those light bulb moments may not happen every single session. They don't, at least not for me. But you should, if you zoom out, okay, I really like this. I like this person, and I feel like I'm getting these aha moments.
Right.
Over the time being spent.
Right. No, it's something I think it takes so much self-awareness for something like that to work. I can speak to a therapist every day for a month, but if I'm continuing a loop in my head saying, I'm right, I'm doing nothing wrong, I'm going to continue on, as you said earlier, doing the same thing that was hurting me. Again, it's not failure, but I'm not helping myself get better. I did want to jump real quick because you talk about radical authenticity and positive vulnerability. These are two, I'm sure, industry buzzwords, but my first question from that is, what did you have to learn about your own vulnerability before you could sit with anyone else's?
Knee-jerk response is the power of being witnessed. And flaws in particular, the things that you don't want to say. First, you've got to be vulnerable with yourself. Exactly. Identify the things that you don't like about yourself and say it out loud. There's so much power in that. I think I spent a lot of time as a young man or younger man, despite some of my clients calling me Unc.
Not Unc.
They try to rage me, and it's great. And then
the kids in their words, Unc means old. Is this okay?
It's funny.
Savage.
We had
Savage.
One clinician was like, I think that's a term of endearment. I'm like, it's not.
No, it's not. But regardless, you're Unc.
To be witnessed, it's so powerful. And I've had two particular groups of men that occurred in my life where I felt vulnerable.
Yeah.
I think of my best friends from high school, my nuclear group of Boston boys. And then I think, and that really helped with my own development and people that you can rely on. And then in grad school, we had a grad school friend group. And then, for lack of a better term or better way of explaining it, I got connected to my New Orleans gays, and I became friends with a bunch of gay men from New Orleans as like their adopted straight brother, essentially.
Sure.
And of course, you're having fun. It's New Orleans. You're enjoying the music, the food, the culture, etc. But then you get to those deeper moments where they're talking about I always had insecurity about being short, so I was telling them about that, and they told me about their experiences, and then to just be witnessed was occurring in that broader dynamic with a bunch of, and these guys are like in their 30s, 40s, and even older too. So it taught me a lot about masculinity, both in terms of the spectrum, like the guy that's looks like a bear and he's big and jacked, and then you have a more slender frame ballerina, right? Like,
right.
And anyways, I don't want to go.
No, I'm so glad you said that, because you work with a lot of men, right? Athletes, fighters. And it's statistically proven men are far less likely to walk into a therapist's room than women are. So from the inside, and this is a conversation that I've actually touched on a couple times in my podcast, is why do you think it is that men are less likely to seek help? Do you think shame-based? Is it that our society wasn't built for it? What do you think the reason is?
Mm-hmm. So one of my favorite psychotherapists, Terry Real, talks about this. And he talks about patriarchy. Now, some of the men, I'm sure I'm going to say this and you're going to roll their eyes. I'm like, oh, here we go again, patriarchy, right? What does that actually mean? But the way I would describe it is like, it's a system that puts you in a narrow box as to what your human experience should be and entails, right? For men, our worth as humans is linked to what we can produce and the actions that we can do, right? And I'm all for working hard, right? But oftentimes, if that's the case, whenever we don't meet that, right? Maybe we, I don't know, mess up at work, or if you're with your spouse and you forget to, I don't know, change the doorknob or whatever the thing is, right? You're not performing, then you go into shame. Like, versus a more appropriate, like, okay, honey, you're right. I'm sorry, I fucked up. Let me fix this, right? It goes because it's directly linked to your worth and
right
as a person.
Right. No, I've had conversations with some of the men too before who refuse therapy, trying to get down to the bottom of it myself. And I think what you said is so astute. Also, the role of being a provider for a man, right? So if you need help, that's giving weakness. That's giving, I can't take care of my family or of my own life. I can't go down that path. How have you seen with the men that you have spoken with getting through? How do you approach the conversations to allow them that radical vulnerability in that space?
I think it's the relationship at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I try to model it and occasionally self-disclose to when it's beneficial to the client. Like, that's where, if you use self-disclosure, it should be always for the benefit of the other person. But some of it can be modeling. Well, eventually you get there because it's you come in for a purpose. And also, I'll share about that. Really, I think is a big thing that the women in our lives, not just women, but like, I think especially if you think about dating and these kinds of things, are really asking for. Also, I have a bunch of cool sports analogies of like positive vulnerability. Because also, when we think about men, when we hear vulnerability, we typically run for the hills. I'm saying as someone who was like that as well. The first association is the needy kind, which is the please accept me. Like, there is that kind of vulnerability.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is the other kind, which is the strong kind, which is this man, take it or leave it, the radical, authentic. And of course, you messing up is part of the process. You mess up, you learn going, right? But then there's strength in that. And there are plenty of different examples from sports that I can use to illustrate it.
Give us a sports example. I'm sure someone listening will know what you're talking about.
If any of my friends from Boston are going to laugh because I'm not a football guy, because I played rugby, but I think it was Jamal Williams' speech. It's a perfect example of radical authenticity and strong vulnerability. And he's playing, this was when he was playing with the Detroit Lions, and he talked about the record, and he starts breaking down. And he's like, every time I think about being tired, we got to have strong fundamentals, bring our basic skills together. And every time I'm tired, I think about that fucking record. And he starts to get emotional, and he acknowledges it within the group of men.
Yeah.
And the rest of the team. And you hear the guys kind of like giving kind of cheering him on, like those subtle little cues.
Right.
And to embrace that.
Right.
And so I ask my clients, I'll show them this in session and a couple other things. And I'll ask, do you think that was vulnerable? And they'll say yes. And I'll say, well, do you think it was weak or do you think it was strong? Strong. Not that everything needs to be put in a weak and strong power dynamic, but I think it's actionabilizing it, especially with like the teens and the adolescents.
Yes.
Sure.
No, I love that example because it's, again, giving other men in the room, I don't know if it's the right framing, but permission to be vulnerable, right? I think men have that. Right. I don't want to bucket men into one big thing because there's many people working on themselves in different scenarios, but it's one of those things where if your friend, and that's why male friendships are so important, right? Have you seen too, I'm curious, The difference is right now, because we're seeing this big headline, the male loneliness epidemic. I did an episode on it myself. Is it something you're running into a lot in your sessions?
For sure. For sure. Because this, at least in American culture that I've observed, it's not relational. Like, and there's a bunch of different reasons for that. When the messaging as a boy is not necessarily guidelines on how to be a man, it just says, don't be a girl, which is kind of just like, it's kind of shitting on the feminine a little bit. And you have, and that, like, just like when I'm gonna relate this to vulnerability for a second. You're actively told, suppress your emotions, it doesn't matter, right? And these are the same foundational skills, right? That's it's called interoception, internal senses, right? Yeah. These skills help us with emotional differentiation, getting specific with our emotions, like the example we went through, helps us with emotional regulation, stress response. Think if I'm, in a game, about to perform, about to, go into a rugby game and tackle a big dude that's twice my size, or if I'm, at a driver's test and I don't want to fail, right? Like being able to identify that your stress response is there, and then because that's identity, identify that you're in the thing, and then to do things like deep breathing or grounding or whatever tool to then bring you down. And these are all the same foundational skills that also when I can better identify my emotions, I can better articulate them and share that with other people. I wouldn't say all men fall into this category, but it's like, if you don't learn the language, you spend the rest of you have kids, and then you have a wife, and you really dive into work, because then you kind of feel more disconnected from your children and your spouse and yourself.
Right.
So I think these are all different compounding factors.
No, definitely. And I think so much of the conversation going on the internet right now is, one, we're acknowledging that the boys aren't okay. There's a lot going on. And then there's the other side, that's a lot of women pushing back and saying they needed to go to therapy years ago and they didn't. They're not trying to help themselves. No shit. They're lonely, right? It's these two compounding kind of ideas. Is that a kind of concept you agree with?
We talked about interoception, their internal senses. The external senses is called exteroception. Those are your five senses: touch, smell, taste, sound, etc. When we think about the basis of being human, things happen in the world. It's information. We organize that information and internalize it through our our senses, right? Which then elicit some sort of bodily response, right? An emotion, right? Let's say, you experience, there's a tiger and you have a feeling in the gut, and it's fear, right? Because that's going to help you. The point is to listen to that, because then either you're going to fight or run or whatever, right? And then your nervous system kicks in, you go into fight or flight, your heart rate increases, right? This is the relationship. It's less about handling the emotions and more about listening to them, right? Because sometimes they can be right. Or sometimes they may blankly be wrong, depending on, based on past experiences, I may be projecting, right? The brain will start to go in overdrive in terms of predicting. That's what anxiety is, fear in terms of the future, to try to keep us safe. But it's, at the end of the day, and oftentimes it's not, at least in my own journey, like I started meditating in grad school, and it was really helped me feel. And I remember I was sitting in my balcony in New Orleans, and I was listening to this meditation. And it's not about clearing your mind. It's just about observing what's going on. And I remember having all these thoughts and being like, I'm supposed to be meditating, all this. And then I hear the narrator's voice. It's kind of Brian Began, who's phenomenal. He says, don't try to solve it. Just notice whatever's coming up. Notice the thoughts. And I said, oh, wow, I'm anxious. I have all these thoughts in my head. Okay, I'm just going to let them be there. And breathe, and just let your body process it and be the observer. You are not the thoughts, you are the entity observing the thought.
I think that, again, so much of us would benefit from breath work, and I think it's a fascinating part of your, emphasis in how you approach working with clients. So to somebody who thinks breath work is just breathing, okay, I'll take a deep breath, I don't feel any better. How do you approach that from the lens of what you just explained? What makes this kind of breath work different for the body?
So, okay, I got something particularly for that. One of my favorite people is this guy named Wim Hof. Are you familiar with Wim Hof? Okay. He's talking about radically authentic. This is Wim Hof is radically authentic. I believe he's Dutch. He's, I think, either mid to late 60s or he's 70. But he's an older Dutch guy, and he's combating chronic mental health conditions and inflammation with cold water exposure and his breathing method called the Wim Hof breathing method.
Okay.
And it's one of the things that I tell my clients, and it really helps with anxiety. I do it as much as I possibly can, or if I'm in session to kind of help me regulate. And it's intense. It takes 10 minutes. You can look it up on YouTube. If we can link it as part of one of the links at the end of the podcast.
Yeah.
So we'll do that. But it's one of the things that you will feel different afterward. There's a couple of disclaimers that you should read in terms of health conditions, like if you have tinnitus, for example. But essentially, it's 3 rounds of breath with 3 components in each round. First is power breaths, where you're inhaling strong and exhaling and letting it go. And then you hold your breath. It's supposed to sound obnoxious.
Of course, as it should.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And each time the breath will be Yeah. Well, actually, the one thing I would say is when you inhale through the nose and kind of try to bring it into your stomach and let it go and let your chest and stomach naturally decompress. It's not about forcing the air out.
Right.
But that's a power breath. So you do 30 of those each round, and each in between there's a breath hold, and your breath holds longer. And there's a bunch of other science that we could go into, but that really helps the brain and body connection.
Yeah.
That's like a formal practice, like meditation, formal practice. Wim Hof breathing is a formal practice to get you into your body.
Yeah.
It's just strengthening those areas. Then there's informal, which is like, you could do it now if you take a deep breath and like feel your feet or the weight of your chair, your weight of your body on your chair. I mean, listeners can do this, like if you're sitting on a subway or if you're, even if you're walking, you could notice, just like see what it feels like to move your legs.
Right. Because we don't think about it normally. It's not something we're aware of. We just do. I'm interested too, the one where you hear 5 things, listen to 4 things. Can you walk me through? Yes. How do those help? Is it again centering you out of where your mind is kind of getting lost?
Yes. So it's using your external surroundings to help regulate. Like we described interoceptive regulation tools, internal regulation tools that are helping you deal with stress or get in touch with your body, with your internal senses. Exteroceptive tools, like a DBT skill, is like holding cold ice. Like if you're I had a friend of mine who was in my fraternity, and he's a DJ, and he texted me. He's like, "I'm having a panic attack on the plane, and I haven't slept. What do I do?" And I was like, "Grab ice. Also, listen to if you hold ice, that is bringing in your touch. That's a grounding force. It's not changing. You feel it, so you can. It's allowing yourself to just focus on that singular thing when you're up here, to just when you breathe and you kind of settle back down.
No, I like that. It's crazy. I had a panic attack like a month ago, and I didn't know what to do. And I sat in front of the AC and I just let the wind blow on my face. And I was like, it's kind of what you're describing. How am I going to get myself out of this, what's happening, and focus on something else that's physically happening to me?
I mean, like also like splashing cold water.
Yes.
People, your face is good. I learned this from my motorcycle instructor. Putting it on your neck, because that's the artery that's bringing you blood vessels, especially if you're dysregulated, is very good. I mean, like if you visually, I had a client that he was having a panic attack. And we worked on this in session, and then eventually he looked at, he was in a context in an organized sport where he came up again, and he went and took a break. He identified it, took a second, and he looked at a flower. He said that helped. Like just looking at the flower. Okay, the flower is red. What does it look like?
Right.
And he smelled. I smell the grass, or I smell it's bringing in these different senses to help. That they themselves are a constant.
Yeah.
Then bring down the overwhelm, because the overwhelm comes when you don't know what to do.
No, of course. And I can understand how talk therapy and body work like this go so well together. In your experience, having focused then on those 2 as your emphasis. What does the body know that talk therapy misses? Does the body actually hold trauma in it? And I know this is something that's been contested and talked about. The body keeps score. Interested in your take.
Right. As I met Bessel van der Kolk because they have a trauma conference in Boston every day.
Wow. Okay.
It's really cool. The critiques, there's a bunch of different critiques pretty much in every psychological modality, right? With particularly, we were talking about this, or the article you shared with me, which is a common critique, is talking about, that your body doesn't keep the score, your brain does. That's what he's saying. Like, it's a metaphor. The body keeps the score. The actual title is a metaphor.
Yeah.
The brain also is part of the body. So that because the trauma is not stored in the actual like tissue, the muscles, right? It stores in the brain, in the limbic system, in the amygdala, and that's what causes then sending signals for me to go into fight or flight, right? So that's what. It
does. No. So that's interesting. So then we'll go back to that scenario you were talking about the guy who's in therapy and he does his breath work and then he goes back to war and, PTSD happens again. It's our brain's way essentially of remembering, of saying that scenario, this circumstance put us into high stress.
Right.
So if we are placed back into it, our brain literally causes the full body to react. Wow. No,
and it's I'm not suggesting breath work is the cure-all, right? There's a bunch of different things that we can do to help kind of connect us back into our body, because that's the thing. It's a loop. Additionally, and I have seen this in the session with others, in particular, there's one session, I don't want to go into detail because of confidentiality, but where I led the client through, that individual had PTSD, led the client through, we did some grounding, some skill building, particularly some meditation, and he started to realize afterwards that he was calm. Initially he was in fight or flight, and he went into rest and digest, and he's like, oh, I have to pee. I'm kind of hungry. And then, because then that's the switch. Because when we think about it, when we're in that state of fight or flight, right? It's not safe for us to eat or use the bathroom, right? So it's the lights are on. Let's get up and go. I should say that I'm still very new in this field. It's like there's so much more to learn. So I'm continuously understanding the applicability of these things, and also there's a bunch of neuroscience, and there's depths to this in terms of actual processes that I think people are also researching.
Yeah,
but it's it's all adaptable. I mean, it's like it shuts down because that's what makes the most sense. We've learned to do this since the dawn of humans.
No, it's true. And the amount of generations of people who existed before things like therapy and like understanding mental health was out there. Like I think of being raised by immigrant parents, or like even an older generation, like even my own parents, they survived real hardship, right? Without therapy. And I think so many parents pass down that belief that needing help is weakness or ingratitude. How much of that do you see too, where it's generational trauma coming into your office? Folks who were taught therapy, you don't need therapy, just figure it out on your own, from their parents.
It's definitely there. I mean, I would say my family would, at least in the beginning, fell into that.
Yeah.
Think through my process, and largely my brother. My brother came out as gay when we were in college. I was in college. And I think that helped model, at least for my family, kind of like it's a self-discovery, right? And they were not necessarily like a lot of the insecurities that they had, and even I had as an older brother, was less about the identity aspect in terms of who you like, right? And more about how do you navigate the world knowing that this is something that people don't like. It's a funny thing, and my brother will probably laugh at this, but as kids, I always wanted to wrestle him, and he didn't want any of that. Right. And when I was like playing with dresses and dolls, and I'm like with Nerf guns and I think a lot of that instinct came in because I wanted him to be, I was like, what's going to happen someone messes with him, then I'm not there. But he's incredibly, he's tougher than I am.
Right.
You
No,
learn those as you grow.
it's incredible how so many things that happen in our families, right? Until something happens to you at home, whether it's your brother coming out, whether it's someone struggling with addiction in your family or suicidal thoughts or what have you, then the family has to take a step back and reanalyze how they look at all of this, right? You may not believe in therapy and you were raised in an immigrant household until your daughter is suicidal and you say, oh my God, anything to help her, anything, right? Let's go to people who refuse it. So we've talked about it a bit already. What would you say and how do you approach a situation where someone you love won't get the help they need?
The balance of change and letting go.
Yeah.
I'm going to answer this there's 3 things I want to say. First is how I would respond in terms of my own moral code. Second is self-determination, the value of that, which kind of digs into the first. And the third is the importance of meeting where the person's at. So for me personally, and perhaps this is selfish, I'm not entirely sure, but if there was someone that I knew needed a lot of help and wasn't getting it, I would look back on, okay, what are things that I value? Honesty, not succumbing to fear or conflict, right? Doesn't mean necessarily cure it, right? Because it's not realistic.
Yeah.
But I would reflect on this as when I work with my clients. Is what are the things? What are the things that you value at this stage in your life? Create a plan to act in accordance with that. And I would probably, in one way or another, directly address that with them. And if they're saying no, and if there's a point where there's nothing else, there's not a conversation or a vulnerable thing that I haven't shared because of my own shit.
Yeah.
If I've done all that, it goes to self-determination, which is that person has a right to choose their own path. Lastly, and this brings me to my last point, and this is a very difficult skill. I mean, well, it occurs in the therapeutic relationship and it occurs in various other relationships. It's learning to meet the person where they're at, the importance of that. There's to talk about a model from grad school. It's called the Stages of Change model. Originally it was developed for addiction, but it's essentially 6 cycles of behavior change. Right? Think about a person who is an alcoholic or even going to therapy. The first stage is pre-contemplation, which is the person has no awareness of what they're doing is harmful to them, or there's completely no awareness. Like, you come to me and say you need therapy, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Right? Not even on my radar. Second stage is contemplation, which is, Tara, you come to me, you're like, come on, you're approaching the conversation of therapy, and I'm like, okay, maybe you're right. Am I kind of reactive and a little bit of an asshole to you or to the people around me? Okay, yeah, but there's no preparation or action yet. Second stage is the third stage rather is preparation, which is, okay, maybe I'm going to go and I've looked at LE Mental Health or Metro Boston Mental Health where I work at, looked at providers, or I've gone on Psychology Today, read a couple providers, and then there's action after preparation, which is actually going and doing the thing. The last part is maintenance, maintaining that. And it's structured in a cycle. And the beautiful thing about this is that relapse is part of it. And it's an upward spiral, meaning that sometimes you can relapse back to the beginning, but you keep learning from each time you do it because we're human and we mess up. The last thing I'll say about this is, in this model, which I find to be very true in real life, you have to meet the person where they're at. Meaning, if you come to me and you're like wanting to encourage me to go to therapy, and I'm in pre-contemplation, or let's say contemplation, I'm thinking about it, and you're like, action, right? Let's go now.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be frustrated, and then I'm going to be frustrated. And it makes the experience worse.
Wow. That's interesting. And I can imagine there's a element of defensive that comes in there. Why do you think I need to go to therapy that bad? Am I crazy? Am I insane? And then you revert back to, I'm not even going to go ever, It's approaching it very like it's unwinding a bomb, so to speak, right? You have to be very careful with how you do it.
And I mean, it's meeting the person where they're at versus where you want them to be.
Yeah. Oh, ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? I want to widen the lens a little bit because so far we've been talking about people who won't get help, but there's a whole other group who want it and can't reach it, or it's not accessible to them. You do have a public health background as well, so I'm very interested. You see this as a system, not just as a room, which is very important. How do you see privilege and health literacy deciding who even makes it to therapy?
All right, you're killing with these questions. This is going back to the current issues of the system, which are many. Just like in journalism, the stories that we hear about, the ones that often will get the most views. I think there are various different barriers, whether it's the fact that and many intakes are in English, right? Or the fact that, one of the benefits of COVID, right? Majority of it was not beneficial, but one of the benefits was access of telehealth, which gave a whole group of people ability to come and do therapy to some degree, right? In person is always better. I will stand hard by that as my clinical opinion, but telehealth is better than nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Always better than nothing at all, right? But it's a massive gap and a challenge that you see in whether it's in terms of how insurance comes into play, or you think about if the person has kids or if they speak another language or they're not from the US, right? Like these different.
The hurdles are endless.
Right.
Yeah. Do you see it's something that's popped up a bunch? And when I was in journalism, it was our only form, AI chatbots. How do you see that as this new revolution continues? Is a lot of people are going to AI to talk about their really deep-seated feelings. What do you think about it?
I think it's a slippery slope. I can see it thinking of I have a cousin she's really smart, and she talks about AI being a thought partner, but also specifically like breaking it out of like the model is based off of a materialistic lens in terms of what it's going to, like the perspective that it's going to give you a response is agreeable, right? Engage continuously with it. So it's like, it's a slippery slope because if I'm going there and I'm talking to them and it's difficult because we're human, we have bias and we want to be told you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, this happens in therapy too.
Yep.
Over validation or what have you. It's and especially because it's like, can it pull information about modalities, right? Can it explain to you what cognitive behavioral therapy is? Yes. Can you actually do it with the chatbot? No. So could it help with some amount of processing? Yes, but also then what becomes your narrative? Like what becomes your actual original thought and what becomes you and the AI? Because it clouds it.
Completely. I'm so glad you said the over-validation part too, because AI is inherently going to say yes to whatever we say. And I think I've had friends, I don't think I know it, who've had therapists who also validate everything they say. There's a good and a bad. And so much of what we've talked about is like the realization, the self-awareness that I know I'm here for a reason. I want to get better. Right. And that's why I think in a system that's broken, of course, people are going to AI because it's free for most of the part, right? Do you think it's something that's going to be implemented in practices alongside real therapists, human therapists, should I say?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just judging based off of the way things are going now, I think it depends also if you're going more an organizational route, like a larger entity versus like an individual's private practice, right? I mean, they have in different practices, they have AI taking notes for clinicians, which is definitely helpful.
Interesting.
Which, I don't know, from my own opinion, I don't use because I value confidentiality, so I don't want anything else listening to it, even though it's all HIPAA compliant, right? But that's my own.
I agree.
Take on it. But so yes, and I even in the trauma conference, I was seeing different, like, let's talk about technology, let's say it broadly, as being partners in the therapeutic process, even with, there was one organization that was essentially could read the person's, essentially their stress level based on the pigmentation, like how red their face would get. But then I also asked, I was like, okay, how does this work with like darker skin complexion and things like this, right? So it's not a perfect model, but I think, I mean, it's exciting, but I think there needs to be boundaries, I think, right? Because like part of, like, if there was a reason why I would say in person, the person with a human versus person with an AI, even if it gets to a place where it can ask you a bunch of questions,
Right.
it's co-regulation. So like, even right now, Tara, we're co-regulating. You initially you came in with your, if you think of a frequency, like your internal frequency,
Sure.
with mine, and then eventually you kind of add into a sync. Think about like if you're at a concert, right? You're with thousands of people and you're all singing the same song. There's an energy in the air.
Right.
That's co-regulation. If I start talking like this, like you're gonna feel that.
Right.
If you jump in, right? And that's oftentimes as therapists, one of the skills that we're trained in is keeping that grounded state, so that way if a client comes in dysregulated, then you can kind of help them come down.
Right. I know that a lot of people too just don't understand. We don't know what we don't know, right? There's so much still that we are in the gray of that could help so much. So I want to go to disaster work because it's where all of this becomes very hard to argue with, right? You can't tell someone who's just lost their home to a natural disaster, you don't need help. You do. So take me into a community, since this is some of the work that you've been really honored for too. Take me into the community after the days of a catastrophe. What are you walking into?
So I do want to put a disclaimer that I'm still very new in the experiences. I've had experiences. There are gray shirts that the organization that I work with, I volunteered with as a gray shirt is called Team Rubicon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fantastic nonprofit. Started by military veterans, for vets, as well as first responders and what they call kick-ass civilians. Essentially, you get put in a strike team of 4 to 5 people in a broader organization of sometimes 30, 40, 50, more than that, depending on the needs of the community and how bad the disaster is, to go in and do their core responsibilities, such as, chainsaws with like cutting down trees that are in the way, doing muck outs if there's a flood and the home is going to be rotted, right? It's doing this at all of zero cost to the person being served. So it's a great organization, and there's so much additionally that comes in that experience in the organization of TR. In terms of when we're going into it's tough. I mean, there's no, to see homes, like, I mean, and hear the stories of I think about one individual who was talking about how she had to grab her 8-year-old from the current that was like the first floor up. It just became a river, right? She had to grab her kid. And then there's plenty of issues as well that come along with emergency management and the governmental organizations that occur, right? Especially when you look at public health funding being cut over the most recent years. So that's why there's such an importance to these from my opinion, these kinds of organizations. Did I answer your question?
You did. And I'm glad, because it gives me a kind of jumping off point, because one of the reflections in all my little research of you that I read from your disaster work is that you coined it as disaster as a catalyst. Doesn't invent a community's problem so much as it detonates it. And detonates the ones already there. I thought that was very beautifully said. What did you mean by that first?
Yeah. In terms of my background, I started off with a dual MPH MSW program, public health and clinical social work at Tulane University. Great program, amazing school. Could talk forever about how great the faculty are, and et cetera. One of the models we learned in this is called the social ecological model, which is essentially, think of it like onion rings, like different systems that affect our lives, from the individual, my thoughts, feelings, actions, to interpersonal, this conversation, to organizational, right? The organization you work in or the culture, to the community, and then policy law. Now, between the social work and public health, you cover all of those systems.
Yeah.
When a disaster comes in, you get to see how do those systems behave under stress. And you see it with COVID in terms of COVID exposed the underbelly of all the issues that were already happening, whether it be in the healthcare system with having not enough beds for people, or clinician burnout, or there's so many different things that when you're exposed to a stressor, you see that the links start to break. And I feel like I'm mentioning a bunch of theories, but it's how I'm sharing them because I find them to be true actually in practice, as opposed to like what I would refer to as ivory tower theory that doesn't apply. But the other term is social determinants of health, which are like the non-medical factors that lead to health. So
Right.
like about your access to healthy food or transportation, or your ability to access healthcare, if it's close by you, how far these are all different factors that come into play for everyday health in a particular community.
Right.
And that's put on that. That's those issues that are causing problems day to day. That's where the steroid comes in.
COVID is such a good example of that. Again, it takes the moment everything crashes for us to realize it's been broken all along, right? And it's very disappointing. But let's talk collective trauma then. So that's something I think a lot of us think of. Trauma is private. One person, one wound, but you've worked with trauma. You've seen it up front. That's hit everyone all at once. How is collective trauma different from what a single person carries?
It's felt in the environment and in the community. Like, I want to be careful in terms of my words, just because it's all so subjective to the experiences of that community. The very thing, like the relationships that we have as a community are the very things that make the air heavy, let's say, from the event, right? But those are the same bonds that are the resilience that comes from communities to be able to lift each other up through going through a shared experience.
It kind of brings me to my next question too, that you've noted on the deployments, the communities hit the hardest are often the ones that are too small or too rural or too far off the map for cameras to care. And that's something I can attest to, having been on the other side. In your opinion, who gets forgotten? Like, having seen it firsthand, and what does being forgotten do to a place that's trying to survive?
The people that get forgotten, I want to say, are the ones that are less connected to mainstream, is the best way I could, like, we know if a disaster happens in Boston, we're able to, it's affecting more people, but it's a city that people can relate to.
It's going to be covered. People, they have more access to healthcare, ambulances, all of the things.
Right. And I want to be careful. I said city that people can relate to. I mean, you can relate to any place, but it's most often to people that are, if you're a big issue is, I'm thinking of one of my colleagues in grad school who was specifically studying individuals with disabilities, whether it be a cognitive disability or if it's a physical disability. I mean, New Orleans has a lot of people that are in need of like handicap accessibility, but it's not existent. I mean, there's potholes everywhere and lack of sidewalks. But those, and whether it's a person literally having less of a voice, I think of my sister, for example. She has autism, so oftentimes we think about what do we do if she's, if she's in a situation she can't articulate, and someone doesn't clock that she doesn't have a voice, and it's the people that get left behind are our fellow Americans. It's the best way I can describe it.
Is there any community too or story on the ground that changed the way you approached everything? You went to the grad school, you did all of the learning, but nothing is quite like being on the ground with these folks.
Okay, can I tell a quick story about my strike team?
Of course.
So the first time I did a deployment was out of grad school, and it was me and 4 other guys, older guys, probably in their 40s and 50s. And they're all from New York. Of course, they put the Boston boy with the New York guys.
Of course.
And it was both of the guys' names were Steve, and one Steve had a bunch of tattoos, looked like a Navy SEAL. Was an English school teacher in upstate New York. And then you have the other Steve number 2, was a veteran, military vet. And I went into it, I was like, okay, I studied all these things, but I'm just going to kind of like get rid of my own theoretical knowledge and just learn, right? And I say that, and I thought, I was like, okay, I think I'm doing a pretty good job of this. But, we were working as a team, and you get really close with these people, right? Like you start not knowing each other, and then you go through like manual physical labor, waking up at 6 a.m. And then by the time they pull up the beer flag, which is where you can sit around a campfire and have a beer with your teammates and tell the stories of the day, it's like 6 p.m. at night. But Steve, number 2, the military veteran, I noticed that he was, I think the first day, it was the first day or two, he would lift and he wouldn't use his knees. So I started getting nervous. I was like, I don't want him to pull his back, right? Because you're supposed to look out for your teammates, and safety is the big thing. Because sometimes, if the structure isn't stable, it could collapse. You don't want to make sure you don't want that to happen. And eventually I said, okay, although I may not have all the experience, I think I'm pretty strong. I could do the heavy lifting. And so I grabbed, I think it was like a fridge or something from Steve, and I was like, let me help you with that. And I told him, eventually I was like, Steve, please try to lift with your knees. We're not lifting your knees. Sorry, bend your knees. Use your legs. I don't want you to pull your back.
Steve, please.
Right. And he's like, Cam, you're right. I should bend my knees. And I see him throughout the rest of it. It was like we spent a week together. He never did. He never bent his knees. And it wasn't until I found out that the reason why Steve doesn't bend his knees is because he can't. He had been in a lot of trauma during his service that caused him to bend his knees. And he would call himself, he said, I'm a kind of self-proclaimed New York ballbuster asshole type. And I interrupted him. I said, Steve, I think you're full of shit. You're not actually an asshole. And he said, what are you talking about? How do you know? And I said, because you would have been when I told you to bend your knees, you would have been well within your right to tell me to go kick rocks at the very least. But you didn't. And he said, Cam, that's because you're right. But I couldn't. I should, but you weren't saying something that was incorrect.
Yeah.
And then we kind of got a deeper conversation about purpose throughout that conversation. And he said, this is what stuck with me. He said, the pain is there, whether I'm sitting at home on the couch on my ass or if I'm out here helping the community. And so he's like, that's why I'm here.
That's beautiful. I'm going to be in pain no matter what. I may as well be helping other people while it's happening. No, I can only imagine too, you got very close to the people on those trips because wow, the devastation, but also I think the word collective trauma, so much also for the people consuming it, for the people who are there to help, not to diminish the ones whose homes have been lost, but it's a hard task on all ends. That kind of brings me to one of my last questions before we round out the interview, but I was stalking your LinkedIn as one does. And you did something recently that I loved, but surprised me. You led a session at NBC Boston for news professionals on the trauma and the specific pressures of that job. As someone who did the job, I wish to God they had something like that for us when we were there. I ended up leaving journalism because the trauma was too much for me in the end. And no one really ever asks if the people who are gathering the stories or for you bearing witness to the stories are okay also. I want to focus on the journalists there. What did you draw from that experience? What do you think journalists are carrying that they don't get to talk about? What did you say to them in that room?
It was less about what I said and more about what I learned.
Really?
Because we had at least going into that event, we kind of had an idea of what we would expect to see.
Yeah.
And the gaps, let's say, as every organization, especially in the society does, whether it's healthcare or journalism or what have you. I think number one, the fact that NBC was even willing to have a conversation like that, I think shows the direction that you're going into.
Yeah.
Because at least and you can speak on this better than I can, but it's the last thing you want to do if you're covering a story and if you're trying to move up the ranks is admit that you're having stress, or if the stress becomes too much, then it becomes trauma. So, and we had a really candid conversation about trauma. We talked about primary trauma, secondary trauma, primary trauma being Tara or I am in a car accident. That's traumatic. Secondary trauma being Tara, you're walking your dog, you see me get into an accident. And you take on that, right? And so, and we gave, a couple of skills in terms of how do you identify your stress levels. I mean, a lot of the tools that we discussed, and also having someone that you talk to and you meet with to kind of decompress, because compartmentalization is a skill. In my opinion, it's a superpower in a lot of ways, because it allows you to deal with the shit when shit hits the fan. But if you're continuously pressing it down, you gotta bring it back up, because that it will make you sick. The analogy I give is, if you imagine a Coke bottle, we're all Coke bottles. Life will come and it'll shake your bottle. That pressure will build. Now you have two options here. Number one is you let the bottle sit. You don't touch it for a day or 2 days or whatever, right? The second option is, you could open it and you could make a big mess. And then you have the third option, which I don't know if you've done this, but have you done like the titrating method where you like crack open the bottle?
Let a little bit out.
Right. Now that's therapy in a nutshell. Is most of us don't have the luxury of putting our bottle down and having nothing come and shaking it again, right? So, and if we open it all up, right, and eventually the pressure builds, it can make a big mess, right? So, a lot of what therapy is one, giving you the skills to identify, okay, there's pressure in my bottle, and then giving you the tools on your own accord when you want to open it and close it, right?
Oh, that was my favorite analogy you said. Yeah, I loved that one. It actually made me feel like, because again, especially in certain jobs, especially journalism, therapy, being a doctor, you're bearing witness to so much evil, to so much bad, to so much pain, that if we don't let a little bit of that out every now and again, we hit the breaking point. I know I hit mine, and I think almost everyone I've spoken to this season has hit theirs in one way or another. And I think we started this conversation talking about why it's so hard to ask for help. And if I line up all these guests I've spoken to, right, the surgeon, the addict in recovery, the lonely male, is it all the same wound? Is all of our trauma, when we strip it bare of the title, of the job, of the role, is all of our trauma and all of our pain the same sort of pain? Is it all need to be approached in the same way, in a therapist's office?
No, I'm going to say no. Are they all wounds? Yes. They're different specific times for sure. Let's say a trauma from combat is different than a wound from childhood, right? If we're interplay, right? Therapy is an avenue for healing. And when you find the right person, it's a great one. But there are people, do I think every single person needs therapy? No, I don't. Can you reach self-determination or self-actualization rather on your own? Yeah, you could. I believe that personally. May take you a little bit longer. But there's a story that I heard about a woman who had trauma, particularly from a jellyfish. She got a really, really bad jellyfish sting. And she was terrified of water, could not go to water. Went to therapy, tried it, and I don't think it really helped much. But then she was connected to a group of women who went and surfed every single day. And they were all trauma survivors themselves from their various different experiences. And she got in the water. And she continued to get in the water. That to me, that's the healing. It didn't occur in the therapeutic office. It occurred in relationship. Back to therapy, it's the relationship.
Right. Right. It just goes to show how important support is too. Having, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a significant other or a friend, someone that you're able to be vulnerable with and able to be just who you are in all the painful glory. That's a beautiful thing. And then to kind of turn the question back on you, do you have a therapist? I think no one can absorb this much pain alone.
For sure. I have a ton of help, whether it is the various mentors that I've had the pleasure of being connected with. A therapist is a title, right? Not everyone that's a therapist necessarily does things that are therapeutic. You can have your barber, for example, or your cab driver or Uber driver, that. Those interactions can be therapeutic, and they have been. So I have my mentor, one of them in particular. His name's Joseph, and he's fantastic. And I go to him, and he duels and I have my direct supervisor at LE Mental Health in Boston. She's fantastic, and a lot of that in life comes up with those things. So it's a space. So you're right. I think everyone needs to have that, whether it's, do you want to call it therapy or not therapy. let alone, I'm lucky to have a good family and my my guys and the women in my life too, like a bunch of different people. That it's a blessing too.
I like to think about it like the filling your cup in different ways, right? We have all these different people, and is it necessarily fair for us sometimes to trauma dump on friends? But the support of just knowing those people are in your life is it's life-changing, truly.
And I would say for those, I'm sure there's listeners that are going to be like, okay, well, that's great. I don't have anyone. How do I would say I got this gift of community and people because I was curious. I talked to people and then it led to a conversation that you clicked with. I mean, there were plenty of people, I'm sure you did the same thing in grad school, that you network and you get LinkedIn and it doesn't lead to anything. And it's funny because the ones that lasted, I mean, I think about my mentor in consulting. We met at a late, like we met at the bar and it led to it. So like engaging in your surrounding, curiosity with people, like those are the things. If there's one theme that led to this blessing, it's that framework.
That's beautifully said. So somebody listening right now who needs this most likely is too proud or too scared or not sure or thinks it's a scam. What do you say to them?
Well, I would encourage you to reflect on how are you doing with what you've been doing? How have things been working for you now? If you're satisfied with it, keep going. But if there's something that you're like, I'm not satisfied in my life, or this is a thing that's recurring and it keeps happening and I'm frustrated or I'm resentful, those are the signs, amongst other things, from just people telling you stuff. So I would ask yourself, how has it been going? How you've been handling?
It takes us wanting to make the change. It goes right back to the beginning of our conversation, right? Last question, Kamran, that we end every episode with is, what is a story you think should be in the news right now that isn't? Something not being talked about that the world needs to hear?
I would say it's a theme that I've noticed, and there's a bunch of different ways I can answer this question. But if there's one truth that I have found that I think is leading to a lot of the issues in our society as Americans, is that people are afraid of what they don't know. And whether it's having to do with people of different ethnic backgrounds or sexual orientation or political ideology, like if you find yourself with a conclusion about a certain demographic, ask yourself, have I found out? Have I really experienced that? Like I think that would do a lot of good.
Well, Kamran, thank you so much for joining us here on Story Chaser. I feel like my cup was filled a bit just by talking to you today.
Likewise, it was a pleasure.
Absolutely. And we're going to place some links and some support in our link for bio all over Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. So thank you again.
Thank you.